Welcome, Game Chasers everywhere, to episode 42 of the Collecting Confidant with your host, GunstarHero. And I'm back this week with an exciting, upcoming, turn-based RPG, which was a Kickstarter project, a successfully funded Kickstarter project, is the second IP from one of my new favorite developers and is a prequel to a classic platformer, but in a completely different genre. Of course, we're going to be talking about Sea of Stars, which is being developed and co-published by Sabotage Games out of Quebec City in Canada, and is also being co-published by Kowloon Nights. Is coming out digitally for the PS4, PS5, Switch, and Steam on August 29th, 2023. Yes, it is finally secured an actual date, and is also getting a physical copy from Limited Run Games, which currently is only available via their backer site, which I'll be giving you the details on shortly. And of course, there will be other physical iterations coming forth through future announcements, but I'll let you know what we know so far. And of course, if you want to try the game early and get an impression for it, whether it's for you, you can now download the demo via the eShop for the Nintendo Switch, which I played for this video. I will be giving impressions on and also talking about what's in the demo and what also is not in the demo, what to expect from the full release. So there's a lot to cover. We're just going to be covering this one game today because I want to do a deep dive and talk about how special this is, even from an early impression, and also how awesome this new story universe is that Sabotage is building, because of course this is a prequel to 2018's The Messenger. And if you never played The Messenger, I'm going to take a brief aside and just describe it very quickly. It is a brilliant 2D side-scrolling retro-inspired homage to Ninja Gaiden that is like a hack and slash platformer that all of a sudden turns into a Metroidvania halfway through the game, and has a cool time travel mechanic that switches between 8-bit and 16-bit eras with this incredible, hilarious sense of humor, awesome sense of control, real kinetic sense of pacing, and is just a joy to play. It is a hardcore experience, but if you're into that kind of stuff, it is definitely something I highly recommend. I finished it in preparation for this video as well because I wanted to understand how the two games tie into each other. And I absolutely love this game. It is very expensive physically. I do own it on the Switch. I was lucky enough to get it back in the day, but if you're looking for it on the PS4 or Switch, incidentally, it is very expensive now. It's going for about 150 to 200 bucks. And I also will warn you that if you're really into The Messenger and want to get it physically and want to plop down all this money for it, just as an aside, it is not complete on carton disc. It does not include the Picnic Panic DLC, but anyway, that's an aside. It's still worth owning and playing if you're into that kind of stuff. But interestingly, even though The Messenger and Sea of Stars, again, which is the prequel to Messenger, they're two separate genres, but set in the same universe. And Thierry Boulanger, who is the head of Sabotage Studio and the main director of both games, during a Q&A that I watched, I actually watched all of the Q&A streams for Sea of Stars to glean as much information as I could. He did confirm that this story universe they're creating has about 5 different arcs. The Messenger represents book 1 of that arc, whereas Sea of Stars represents book 2 of that arc. And based on some rumors already, it looks like there is a sequel to The Messenger in the works. So that's very exciting. But overall, I'm loving the lore and the story universe they've created between these two very unique IPs thus far. And I am fascinated to see where Sabotage goes from here, especially being such a small studio, but super talented, super detail-oriented, and very passionate about what they're doing, and very hardcore. So I've talked a little bit about The Messenger, and one more thing just to mention before we move on to Sea of Stars, which is the main focus of today's video, is that if you have not yet played The Messenger, you are not required to play this to get into Sea of Stars. It is a standalone game, even though they're set in the same universe, but it will benefit you to play it anyway if you're really into the lore, just to see all the connections. And I will say, having finished The Messenger now, and having gone through all the lore, especially all the stories that the shopkeeper tells you when you're buying items, I am fascinated to see some of the hints that I heard about play out in Sea of Stars, which takes place thousands of years before The Messenger, before the Great Flood. Now, getting back into Sea of Stars and why this game's so special. Again, it's in demo format now for the eShop on Nintendo Switch. You can play it now with the full release coming out August 29, 2023. It is a turn-based RPG that is retro-inspired and has three main inspirations creating its foundations. Number one, you've got Chrono Trigger, which you'll see all over this game. We'll get into how that compares and contrasts. You also have Super Mario RPG, and finally, Illusion of Gaia. All these games came out in the 90s for the SNES. I admittedly didn't play Illusion of Gaia, but I have played Super Mario RPG and Chrono Trigger and can at least speak to that regard. But I understand from having watched some videos where the influence of Illusion of Gaia lies as well. We'll be getting to that shortly. So let's talk firstly about the story and the characters, and then I'll break down the combat, the traversal, the overworld, and some of the things that you can expect from playing in the demo if you haven't played it already. And also, we're going to list out a few of the features and things that are going to happen outside of the demo in the full release that you wouldn't have seen in this vertical slice. And again, the demo is a vertical slice. It's not fully indicative of the final product, and there's a lot of stuff that isn't included in there that's going to be very pivotal to the final product. So the story, again, it's centered around two heroes. You have Valere, who is a female character who was born on the winter solstice, uses moon energy and this moon rod to unleash devastating attacks. And you also have her compatriot Zale, who was born on the summer solstice, a male character who wields sun energy and a sun blade. And you can interchange between these two characters willingly during the campaign, depending on who you want to play as. It's not really going to affect your gameplay experience too much at all, but it really just comes down to who you identify with the most. And on top of that, you'll have 4 other additional playable characters that'll join your party, including one of the ones that have already been revealed in the demo, which is Garl, who is a warrior cook who serves more defensive and healing capabilities within your party, because of course you're counterbalanced by Zale and Valere, who are more attack focused and have these destructive either moon or sun-based attacks that can be employed during battle. So that's essentially the characters. There's 3 more characters to be revealed very soon. These are going to be the 6 playable characters, in addition to other NPCs that'll join your party in and out throughout the narrative. Now, without spoiling too much, very briefly in terms of story, you're on this journey across this archipelagos, which is a series of small islands, which are all these self-contained biomes, in this journey to save the world from this evil alchemist. That's basically it. And like I said, it takes place thousands of years before the Messenger, before the Great Flood. So if you're familiar with some of the story beats in the Messenger, you'll get kind of an indication as to where Sea of Stars is heading, again, without too many spoilers. So that's the story and characters in a nutshell. More characters to be revealed soon as the game gets closer to launch. But now let's talk about the game itself. So I want to start with the combat. And like I said before, if you've played Chrono Trigger, you're going to be right at home here, because number one, the main thing about the battle system that's very cool and refreshing and also very nostalgic is that when you're traversing throughout the game world, you jump immediately into battle. There's no separate battlefield that you have to teleport to. The game just goes right into it, and there are no random encounters either, so you can control the flow of your battle. So if you decide that you don't want to battle one of the enemies you see on screen, you can simply just go around them. To an extent, there will be some forced encounters to get through the narrative, but overall, there's no random encounters, there's no grinding unless you want to. It's just you jump into the battle, and here's where it gets really interesting, because the battles are very complex, because they not only include a bunch of classic tropes as a nod to both Chrono Trigger and Super Mario RPG, but also, like Sabotage likes to do very well, introduces some very new innovative mechanics to bring it into the modern age and just add a whole bunch of strategy. Combat is very reminiscent of Chrono Trigger in the sense that, like any turn-based RPG, you can attack, you can employ special attacks as well, you can employ items during the battle to heal and add buffs, and then there's also the Chrono Trigger-inspired combo system. So let's go through all the particular details of combat so you can understand how this is going to work out and what games it pays homage to. So for instance, when you dish out a regular attack with your rod or your sword, when you actually down an enemy, they'll actually expel a bunch of live mana, or what's referred to here as eclipse magic, that you can collect and use to boost your next attack. So whether you're gonna unleash a regular melee attack or a special attack, you can add a little extra boost to it to unleash extra damage, which I think is a very cool feature. Then on top of that, I mentioned how there is a combo system, meaning that two characters can combine forces to unleash a devastating super attack that really just nails down your enemies. And again, that's taken right out of the pages of Chrono Trigger. The main differences, though, from a quality of life and accessibility standpoint, is that in Chrono Trigger, when the characters would unite to do a combo attack, they would both expel MP and AP, magic points and attack points, which would affect how your next character would engage in the battlefield after you unleash the combo. In Sea of Stars, that doesn't happen. Only the primary character initiating the combo will actually have to expel any MP or an AP, meaning that the character you did the combo with, the secondary character, when it's their turn, they're going to have all their MP and AP intact so they can also do a combo. And the reason for this is the developers want to give you the opportunity to whoop ass. Really, if you can just chain together devastating attacks, you can own the battlefield if you know what you're doing. And I find that very thrilling and in line with their overall style, because the Messenger felt like that as well. It felt very kinetic. And when you really know what you're doing, you can own the battlefield and just go attack to attack to attack, especially when you're dealing with bosses. It just feels very engaging, fluid, and just badass at that point, right? So in line with that whole idea of it being able to be badass and add extra oomph to your attacks, they've also taken a page out of Super Mario RPG and allowed you to add timed button presses to both your attacks and your blocks. So again, if you've played Super Mario RPG or even the Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga, you'll be right at home here. And what I mean by this is that when you go to do a melee attack, for example, when you notice that the animation's happening on screen, that you're actually hitting the enemy with your sword or your weapon or whatever, if you press the attack button at the right time, you'll add extra damage to your attack. And conversely, when it's your turn to play defense, when you're going to block an attack, if you press the attack button at just the right time, it'll reduce the amount of damage that you take, adding another strategic layer to the overall battle experience, in addition to what we already talked about with the combo system, the specials you can unleash, and of course the boosts that you can add to your regular attacks. So there's a lot going on here. Finally, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention this here, the most innovative aspect that they bring to this battle system, because of course, a lot of the tropes are brought in from older games, but what they bring to this in terms of modernizing it is the very cool lock system, which you will see above the enemies different icons corresponding to different types of attacks, whether it be a melee-based attack or an elemental special attack. What happens is these icons appear above the enemy's head as you see their turns counting down to their next summon. And you have an opportunity to actually potentially cancel the summon by attacking them in a way that corresponds to the icons. So for example, if you see a couple of swords, that means you have to hit them twice with melee-based attacks. And then if you see maybe a sun icon, that means you also have to have Zale attack them with one of his special attacks. Now, in most scenarios, because the game is so quickly paced, you may not always be able to break all these locks with just one or two characters individually before they actually unleash their summons. So that thing is solved by unleashing the combo attacks that we spoke about before, where with a certain combination of two characters that have those icons in tow, if you unleash a devastating combo attack, you may be able to break multiple locks at once. And even if you don't cancel the summon entirely, whatever amount of locks you do break above their heads, that will effectively weaken the summon when they actually pull it off. So I found that very innovative, and expecting nothing less from Sabotage, which is famous for not only adding old tropes, but adding new modern mechanics like they did with the very cool Cloud Step mechanic in the Messenger. So I find that just another very cool layer, adding to the overall strategic soup of the combat, which is enthralling and engaging. In addition, when a battle is completed and if you do level up, your character will get a choice of about 3 to 4 different upgrades that they can add to their stats, whether it's an attack increase or a defense increase. It's up to you how you want to customize your character's tree going forward. Then, of course, when you're done a battle, as you entered, you'll exit right back into traversal. It is so fluid and connected. I love the fact that it just feels like this seamless experience from start to finish. So that then gets us into traversal. So this is where we see the third influence upon this game, which of course is Illusion of Gaia for the Super Nintendo. And that influence plays into the fact that they wanted to have this open, free-ranging traversal mechanic. They specifically refer to it as unshackled traversal, meaning that you're not tethered to a grid or a playing field that you can, if you think you can dive off a cliff, you can dive off of it. If you think you can climb a ledge, you can go there. It's open traversal, making it very kinetic, allowing you to explore and encouraging you to find the many secrets that are laid out in this world. And the world is designed in such a way to make traversal a breeze. You're never going to spend too much time going from point A to point B. They designed this with the idea of it being bite-sized, like the whole biomes, the missions, the dungeons. Everything can be completed relatively simply. There are no quest logs either. So if you think that's going to hamper you in terms of finding the next objective, don't worry, because you can actually camp. And when you go to camp to restore your MP and your HP, you can also cook meals to take on your next journey. When you talk to your party members, they will always give you a hint of what to do next. So you're never going to be lost because the game was designed to keep you from moving from point A to point B. They were very explicit in the fact that they said, this game was designed with no grinding in mind. Yes, you can grind if you want to. If you want to go revisit old areas and defeat enemies to get more ingredients for your stews and your recipes. But overall, they found that the game is more efficient if you just keep going from story beat to story beat. And the world was designed with this in mind. In addition to that, when you are leaving a town, for example, and going to your next point of interest, you'll be greeted by a world map taken right out of Chrono Trigger again, very similar in terms of design, even down to how the houses are depicted in the towns. They're all bunched together in clusters. The only thing I'll say about the overall maps is that the traversal movement felt a little slow, but that was done deliberately because they have a very specific rhythm done in mind. But I'm kind of hoping they'll pick up that pace just a little bit. It felt a little sticky, but otherwise, gorgeous detailed overall maps, lots of points of interest. And this is where we get into the immersion aspect of the game, because even though they want you to keep playing from point A to point B to point C and playing through the narrative, they've also given you lots of places to stop, relax, and just take the world in and do a bunch of activities. If you don't feel like questing, if you don't feel like doing the next mission, you can, for example, go fishing. As I said before, this is set in an archipelago with many different islands. Each island is going to have its own specific pond with its own specific fish species that you can fish for. You can also go to taverns and listen to bands play songs. During the camping sessions that I mentioned before, there is a side character by the name of Teak who records all these different stories that she finds throughout the narrative and will read them back to you during the campfire session, just like the shopkeeper did in Messenger. And if you're familiar with those sequences, they're not only hilarious, but thought-provoking as well. I will say there's quite a bit of philosophy and moralizing that went into those stories in addition to their humor that I found fascinating, intriguing. I even learned a few things about myself and the world, I'm not going to lie, and I'm really excited to see that being part of Sea of Stars because the team at Sabotage, they are just such excellent storytellers. I am so excited to see how this lore is going to play out. So that's another thing you can do. In addition to that, you can go sailing, so you can go traverse the different islands and go looking for different loot and different special goods. There's so much to do in this game, even when you're not playing through the story, that'll keep you engaged. Now, this is essentially giving you the rundown of what you're able to see in the demo. I'd say the demo, if you go and play it on the eShop. It can be completed at about an hour and a half. So you'll be able to traverse a town, visit merchants, buy goods. You'll notice some of the areas that are locked off because you haven't played the full game yet. You'll also be able to go into a dungeon, fight some battles, do some puzzle solving, and at the end of the demo, you'll fight a boss. You'll get a brief glimpse into the main systems. In addition, you can do some of the fishing as well, but you can't do any of the sailing yet. You'll be able to camp, you'll be able to fish. The only thing you can't do in the demo is sail, but that's coming in the full version. But now that I've talked about the demo version, let's list off some of the features that aren't in the demo version, but you can expect from the full game because, as I said before, I did do a deep dive into the history and development of this game. I watched all the live streams with Thierry Boulanger where he answered questions from the audience and gave a hint as to what to expect from the full release. So let's go through some of those features now. Number 1, day and night cycles. One of the main motifs running through Sabotage's game so far, and this was a big motif in the Messenger as well, is time and time manipulation. Whereas in the Messenger, it was all about jumping back and forth between two eras, the 8-bit and 16-bit area via teleport chambers. There was a manipulation of time, and depending on which area you were, it would have different effects on the game world and story events and so on and so forth. In Sea of Stars, eventually you'll be able to unlock the ability to manipulate day and night cycles, which will be used to help you solve puzzles. So for example, you might be in the daytime and need to switch over to night to have a certain puzzle solved, or maybe a certain event is only triggered at night, and you can manipulate that at will. The only thing is to avoid abusing this switch between day and night. It won't have any impact on combat. So for example, if you're playing as Zale and you're using the sun energy, you won't get a boost from playing in the daylight. And conversely, if you're playing as Valera during the night, there won't be any type of boost. It really doesn't matter which characters you're playing as. The story will remain the same. So really, the shift between day and night comes down to helping you solve puzzles and trigger certain events to get through the game. So that's one thing to expect. Number 2, we talked about fishing. The one thing you won't see in the demo is the fact that there's going to be fishing upgrades as well in terms of increasing the stamina of your reel and so on and so forth. And this is going to be done by actually going and trying to capture all the fish that you can and add them to your roster. So the more fish you collect and add to your roster, the more upgrades you're going to unlock, and just to make fishing less and less of a chore as you go on. Also, we talked about combos and how they apply with characters in your party. I did mention that there are going to be up to 6 playable characters in your party by the time you get through this narrative. In the battles, you can only use 3 at once, but you're also going to have 3 reserves. And here's a key thing that's cool from an accessibility standpoint. You can also do combos with your reserve characters as well, and it doesn't require them to expend any MP or AP points. So effectively giving you over 20 combos at your disposal and giving you multiple strategies, because one of the main things that the developer mentioned is that they want you to use every character in this game. Where traditionally in old RPGs, you may have a favorite character that you cling to and use throughout most of the game. Because of that lock strategy that we talked about during combat, where you have to break different locks to weaken the enemy and cancel their summons, by employing different combinations of characters, this will allow you to engage with specific types of enemies that have specific types of locks that have to be broken. In addition, each character is going to have up to 3 unlockable special attacks they can employ, but there's also going to be an ultimate attack that you can eventually unleash by building up an ultimate bar, and this is done by unleashing combos. So many ways to engage in battle. It's really exciting to see how you can add your personal flair to it and just kick butt in so many devastating ways with this rhythm in mind. On top of that, some other things they mentioned that were pretty key is the fact that there's not going to be any romance in the story. So it's really just about the hero's journey without getting into gender identity or sexual identity. That's not going to be part of this. And also in terms of customization, character specifically, they decided to forego that because animation is such a hallmark of their games that with it being pixel art, to actually add different hair, different faces, different outfits, it would just require too much work and probably would have delayed the game by like another couple years. So in terms of character design and what they appear as, what you see was what you get, which I'm fine with because I typically try to go with the developer's vision rather than my own anyway. A few more things to cover is side quests. They were asked about this. There are going to be some optional quests you can do. As I mentioned before, you can go sailing, go to different islands, find different loot, different items. And they're also toying with the idea of taking out another page from Chrono Trigger. If you recall from Chrono Trigger, before you fight the final boss, there is this scene known as the Fated Hour, where before you fight the final boss, you have a chance for all of your characters to do specific character side quests to clean up anything you haven't done before you finish the game. They're also toying with the idea of doing that with this, so more to come on confirmation of that. As well, there's going to be an extended ending. If you decide to do a lot more of the side stuff and collectibles, you will be able to get that more fuller experience. And they've also talked about DLC that's going to be coming out, known as the Throes of the Watchmaker, which was added as a Kickstarter incentive for surpassing their financing, so you can expect some DLC to come down the road, potentially even a second DLC pack depending on how well the game does. And as a nice little homage again to Chrono Trigger, during the funding process, they did announce that Yasunori Mitsuda, the famed composer of Chrono Trigger, Chrono Cross, and more recently Xenoblade Chronicles 3, is jumping on along with composer Eric Brown to add some special themed tracks. So much more stuff to get excited about. And again, as I said before, and I'll reiterate this, if you haven't played The Messenger, it does not require you to play this to jump into the lore of Sea of Stars. But of course, if you have, it's just going to accentuate your experience overall. So that is a very big deep dive into this very exciting turn-based retro-inspired RPG that is coming very soon. And as I mentioned, if you want to get this physically, right now, Limited Run is handling the publishing of it, but the only way currently to secure a physical copy is if you go to the game developer's main website, which I'll include in the comments. It's seaofstarsgame.co. There is a store link which will take you to a backer page where you can buy the physical version for $90 Canadian or roughly $65 US. What will happen is when the game goes in production, you'll receive an email to elect the platform of your choice. But as per the Q&A I watched, Thierry Boulanger did mention that there will be other buying options, most likely via a very closed pre-order. And I am fairly confident to say that Limited Run will probably be handling it. And I would expect to hear an announcement about that in late summer, so stay tuned for that. But if you want to get on that train now, you can go secure your backer exclusive physical copy via the game's main website. This has been episode 42 of The Collecting Confidant with your host GunstarHero. Make sure you like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Later, Game Chasers, and peace.